My name is Andy and I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic. And we are continuing this week with Bill's story. I'm going to crack straight into it because I want to try and get the second half of Bill's story done in this session. So for those where we left it last week, we're towards the bottom of page 8. Bill has just been in hospital for his third time. He went in first of all in the autumn or fall if you're American of 1933. Then he went in again July 34, then September 34, and on Armistice Day, which is 11th of November of 34, he started drinking again. And then this now brings us up to the end, towards the end of November of that year, after the third stint. So near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction. I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work, so that would have been Lois, would have been off at Macy's. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. And this old school friend is a guy called Ebby Thatcher. We talked a little bit about Ebby when we read the forward to the second edition. And they were actually, when it says old school friend, they were at school for 1 year together in the 9th grade. When they were both, because Ebby was from Albany, but they both attended somewhere called the Burton Seminary, in modern times referred to as the Burton Academy, and it still exists today. So that's how he knew Ebby, this school friend. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumour had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There's that selfish self-centeredness there, isn't it, that we all have as alcoholics. Oh great, I won't have to hide the gin, I can get it out and drink it openly. I thought of only recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. A jag being a drunk, a bender, or whatever. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. And the little backstory there about them chartering a plane, Ebby and Bill were drinking with a guy called Ted Burke, who was a pilot, and they convinced him during a bit of a drinking spree to fly to Manchester, and they flew there the next day, and apparently there was going to be a fanfare of people meeting them, and they all got off the plane completely smashed, and ended up having to write apology letters. And there's a letter that Bill wrote to somebody that's in the archives. So, he'd been out on this ridiculous jag, and he was remembering those old times, and that was what he was at first thinking about. He was, all those so-called good times that we convinced ourselves we had. The door opened, and this would have been the door of 182 Clinton Street, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. And that drink Bill would have pushed across the table was a bathtub gin and pineapple juice. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. And what had actually happened to Ebby? Ebby at this point was living with the Oxford Mission, and which was a thing that they ran for homeless people, where you could get a bed for the night if you did some service work, testifying. This is Ebby has at this point been through the 5 C's of the Oxford that they followed, which became the 6 steps, which became the 12 steps. So this is Ebby passing on the message, coming to him to do that. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading a judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. So what Ebby has effectively done here, and obviously it's referring to it as a religious thing, that was the programme of the Oxford group, which was a very religious programme. And Ebby, as I say, had done the 5 C's, which we talked about back when we read through the foreword to the second edition. So this is him doing the continuance, the passing on of the message. And it's interesting that at this point, that was 2 months ago. So Ebby has effectively done his steps. That I know they weren't the 12 that we do now, but he'd effectively done the work. And he had actually been sent out. The story of his court commitment, incidentally, is quite interesting too. There were a couple of guys involved in this. So there's a guy called Seba Graves and a guy called Shep Cornell, and they heard that he was going to get this alcohol insanity thing. And in Vermont at the time, if you got it was a 3-strike rule. If you got 3 alcohol-related offences, on the third one, that was 6 months in the asylum. And most people knew once you went in that asylum, you probably weren't getting out because they didn't really have a solution to the alcohol problem. So most people just ended up in there almost indefinitely. And these two guys had heard about Ebby and they wanted to try and help him. They were from the Oxford group. And so they got together with Roland Hazard, which was another friend of theirs. And it was actually Roland and Seba Graves that went to court. And I think it was probably helped that the judge who suspended his commitment was Judge Graves. Yeah, Seba Graves' dad. So I'm sure that helped just a little bit. Roland Hazard went to court because he was quite an upstanding member of the community, and they thought that if he appealed to the judge, that would help as well. And sure enough, the judge did let him off. And now here he is telling Bill about this experience. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And what we're seeing here is the setup to step 1. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge, and a proffered means to put before someone for acceptance. And they used to write these pledges about, I won't drink and sign them. But this one, there was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back to me. So now he's remembering that day back in 1917 when he was inside the cathedral. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay it all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. And now in the next paragraph, we're going to see how Bill now takes that spirit of the universe idea and turns it back towards a personal God. And we see the differences here between spirituality and religion in some ways. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I'd adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed to be the boss universal, meaning the dominant one. And he certainly had me. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. What's that? Step one, right? So this is the explanation of Ebby and Bill, step one. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. I think that's a description of a psychic change, don't you? Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. I began to look as though religious people were right after all. I hated that moment when I had that moment. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past, here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. So this is Bill seeing the proof. And this is what people see in us when we go to them and we tell them our story and we pass this thing on when we do what we call a 12-step call. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganised. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Once again, we're describing a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening there, aren't we? Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go in search of such conceptions as a creative intelligence, universal mind or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a Tsar of the heavens, however loving his sway may be. I have since talked with scores, score being 20, so multiple 20s, so at least 40, men who have felt the same way. And I like how Bill here is making that transition between the description of the spirit of the universe, this very impersonal thing, and this Tsar of the heavens, something you can almost picture. You might not like the words he's used, but those words were appropriate for him. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" And this is something that we are going to see come up again later on when we read We Agnostics in pages 46 and 47. We're going to see this later on in the book, these statements again. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans as when we want him enough. As long as I saw, I felt, I believed. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. So what we've just had there is Bill effectively doing a step 2. Wouldn't have been called step 2 back then, but that's effectively what Bill's done there. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment I had needed and wanted God. And this is Bill remembering back to that time in 1917 when he was full of fear and he prayed to God about that fear. For a brief moment I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamours, mostly those within myself, and so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, so this is now Bill's fourth visit to Towns Hospital, took place in December 1934, and we know that because we got the receipts in the archives. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. That's basically like the shakes that you can get, and if you, when you try and come off alcohol, if you show signs of that, you definitely should seek medical attention and medical assistance. You may need a full medical detox or something like that. And that's what Bill's done, isn't it? Bill hasn't mucked around, he's gone to the hospital. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him to do with me as he would. Step 3, isn't it, right? Okay. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins, step sort of 4 coming in here, and became willing to have my newfound friend, and that's friend with a capital F, so it's talking about the higher power of God, take them away, root and branch. So that's kind of step 6 and 7 there, isn't it? I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. So that's like a step 5. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. Step 8 stuff here. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. So Bill's talking about the willingness to do step 9 and doing it. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. So we're talking step 10 here, right? I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray and prayer meditation. This is step 11. Never was I to pray for myself except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive. But that would be in great measure. My friend promised, and now we're talking about Ebby again, lowercase f on friend. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. And notice that is plural there. This doesn't just solve the booze problem. This is going to solve all our problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant self-destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light. And there's another illustration of Bill putting the God idea into a personal concept or form, who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had ever known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. And what we've just had there is like the abridged version of Bill's white light moment story. And if you want the full story, you'll find that in a book called Pass It On, which is an AA publication and well worth a read. For a moment I was alarmed, and I called my friend the doctor, and that's Dr. Silkworth, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you. I don't understand. But you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. My friend had emphasised the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Notice this wording here, some step 12 stuff right here. Particularly, it was imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. This is Bill accepting that he's got to take step 12. He's not done it yet, but this is the acceptance of step 12. Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained sceptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time, and I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. And this, I think, I've got this highlighted in my book. I think it's really important. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. And again, we're going to get rough going, right? We're not, I know there's some great promises come true in this process. It doesn't mean life's always going to be smooth and easy. It's not. But this is a design for living that works regardless of what we're going through. He commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. Have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted. Feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city, the city it's talking about is Akron, Ohio, and its environs, which is a fancy word for outskirts and suburbs, surrounding areas, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. And that right there is why we meet, isn't it? We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. I know some of us come in here because we go, I need to meet him, but that's not why we meet. We meet so that the newcomers can find us and we can pass this on. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. And there's a little asterisk there, and down at the bottom of your book, depending on which printing or of the 4th edition you've got. Mine says in 2001 AA is now composed of over 100,000 groups. I think in the 2009 printing it talks about 116,000. But the point is this thing has been rapidly growing ever since. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. And that's the story of a guy called Bill Cousins, who was a Canadian pro bridge player, bit of a gambler, also a drinker, was staying with Bill and Lois, and they went away, and every time he went away he was pawning some of their stuff to raise money or whatever, and that got out of hand, and in the end he basically gassed himself in their oven. There is, however, this is a brilliant segue, this, isn't it? Right? We just talked about a bloke gassing himself in an oven. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, But just underneath it, there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia, which is perfection or heaven or however you want to see that. We have it right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.